Vivian Thorne stood before her bedroom mirror, her fingers trembling slightly as they hovered over the shadow box mounted on the wall. The metals inside gleamed under the afternoon light streaming through the window, each one carrying weight far heavier than the metal itself. She had not worn them in 3 years. Not since the last ceremony, when the flash of cameras and the press of bodies had sent her heart racing and her vision tunneling until she had to excuse herself to breathe in the parking lot. But today was different. Today was for them. For Corporal Daniels, who had bled out in her arms despite everything she had done. For Sergeant Kowalski, who had taken the round meant for her. For Lieutenant Shun, who had smiled, even as Vivian worked frantically to stop the bleeding from wounds no one could survive. The charity event tonight was raising money for wounded veterans, and she owed it to those who never made it home to show up and honor their sacrifice. Her hands steadied as she lifted the shadow box from the wall. The purple heart with its gold border and purple enamel heart. The bronze star with its V device for valor. The combat medical badge that had been pinned to her uniform in a field hospital while mortars still fell in the distance. Others too, one she rarely thought about because thinking about them meant remembering the moments that earned them. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe your community has strong military ties like this one, where veterans gather to support each other and remember those who served. Vivian carefully pinned each medal to her dress jacket, the same navy blazer she had worn to memorial services and veteran gatherings. Her reflection showed a woman in her mid-30s with dark hair, pulled back in a simple style, her posture straight from years of military bearing, even though she had been out for nearly 4 years now. The medals sat heavy on her chest, visible proof of service that most people would never understand. She thought about leaving them home. Wearing them always drew attention, and attention meant questions, and questions meant reliving things she had spent years trying to process in therapy. But the invitation had specifically mentioned wearing uniforms or medals if veterans had them, a way to show solidarity and honor among those who understood. She wanted to belong to that community, even if her service record was complicated by classifications she could never discuss. The drive to the community center took 20 minutes through streets lined with autumn leaves. Vivian parked in the back of the lot, taking a moment to breathe deeply and center herself before walking toward the building. Music and conversation drifted through the open doors, the sound of a gathering already well underway. She smoothed her jacket one final time and stepped inside. The main hall had been decorated with patriotic bunting and photographs of local veterans throughout the decades. Round tables filled the space, veterans and their families mingling over refreshments while a local band played soft background music. Several men wore their old uniforms, the fabric a bit tighter than it had been in their service days. Others had donned unit caps or jackets with patches denoting their service branches and deployments. Vivian made her way to the registration table, where a cheerful volunteer checked her name off the list and handed her a name tag. The woman glanced at Vivian's medals and smiled warmly, thanking her for her service before directing her toward the refreshment area. It felt normal, comfortable even, just another veteran among many, all gathered for a good cause. She accepted a glass of water and stood near the wall, observing the room. An elderly man with a Vietnam veteran cap caught her eye and nodded respectfully. She nodded back, a silent acknowledgement between those who had seen combat. A younger woman in an army uniform approached and struck up a conversation about deployment experiences, comparing notes about the differences between their eras of service. Vivian kept her responses general, focusing on the universal experiences rather than the specific missions she could never mention. The evening unfolded pleasantly for the first hour. Vivian found herself relaxing, the familiar camaraderie of the veteran community easing some of her social anxiety. She spoke with a former Navy corpsman about the challenges of military medicine, carefully steering away from any details that might require explanation. She listened to a Marine talk about his struggles with civilian life, offering quiet understanding born from her own difficulties adjusting after discharge. But then she felt it, that prickle of awareness that comes from being watched. Vivian glanced up from her conversation to see a man across the room staring at her, his eyes fixed on her medals. He was perhaps 40, stocky build, wearing a National Guard jacket with unit patches. His expression was not one of respect or curiosity. It was suspicion, narrowed and calculating as his gaze traveled from one medal to another on her chest. Their eyes met for just a moment before he looked away, but Vivian felt the shift in atmosphere like a coming storm. Her pulse quickened slightly, old instinct awakening. She tried to return her attention to the conversation, but her awareness remained fixed on the man who had now moved closer, speaking quietly to another veteran while gesturing in her direction. Both men looked at her, their expressions hardening. The circle of onlookers had grown to nearly 30 people, their faces a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. Marcus Pettigrew stood at the center like a prosecutor delivering closing arguments, his voice carrying across the increasingly quiet hall as the band had stopped playing to watch the confrontation unfold. "Prove it," Marcus demanded again, his finger jabbing toward her medals. "Show us your DD-214. Show us deployment orders. Hell, show us anything that proves you actually earned those instead of buying them off eBay or stealing them from some storage unit." Vivian felt her jaw tighten, the muscles in her neck going rigid with tension. Her hands remained at her sides, but her fingers had curled into loose fists, an unconscious defensive posture from years of training. The faces surrounding her blurred slightly at the edges, a warning sign she recognized from therapy as the beginning of a stress response. She forced herself to breathe slowly through her nose, counting silently to keep herself grounded in the present moment. "I served honorably," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I earned every decoration I wear. But I'm not going to stand here and justify my service to someone who has already decided I am guilty." "That is exactly what a fraud would say," called out a woman from the crowd. "A real veteran would be proud to show proof." The woman was perhaps 50, wearing a shirt that identified her as a Gold Star mother. Vivian felt a pang of sympathy even through her rising anxiety. This woman had lost a child in service to the country, and now she saw Vivian as someone disrespecting that sacrifice. The tragedy of the misunderstanding cut deeper than the accusation itself. Marcus seized on the support, his confidence growing. "See, even the families know. You people who fake service, you disgrace every real veteran in this room. You spit on the graves of the fallen." Each word landed like a physical blow. Vivian thought of Corporal Daniels, his blood soaking through her uniform as she worked desperately to save him. She thought of the weight of his dog tags in her hand when she finally had to stop compressions and call it. She thought of writing the letter to his mother, knowing no words could ever be enough. And now this man, who had never seen combat, who had never held a dying soldier, dared to speak of spitting on graves. Bethany Carlisle pushed through the crowd, her event coordinator lanyard swinging as she moved. Her face was flushed with stress, eyes darting between Vivian and Marcus and the growing crowd of spectators. She held up her hands in a placating gesture that somehow seemed directed more at the accusers than at Vivian. Okay, everyone, let's just calm down," Bethany said, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness. "I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. Miss Thorne, perhaps you could step outside with me for a moment and we can sort this out privately." The suggestion sounded reasonable, but Vivian heard the subtext clearly. "Leave quietly, so we do not have a scene. Disappear, so the accusers feel validated and the event can continue without controversy." She had seen this pattern before, the path of least resistance that always seemed to involve the accused removing themselves rather than the accusers being asked to show restraint. "I would prefer to stay," Vivian said quietly. "This is an event for veterans, and I am a veteran. I have every right to be here." "Rights?" Marcus laughed harshly. "You have got some nerve talking about rights while wearing medals you did not earn. You know what we used to do to thieves in my unit? We made sure everyone knew exactly what they were." The crowd murmured agreement, a low rumble of approval that sent ice down Vivian's spine. She could feel the mob mentality building, that dangerous groupthink where individual reason gave way to collective anger. She had seen it before in different contexts, knew how quickly it could turn from words to actions. Her training screamed at her to extract herself from the situation, to tactically retreat and regroup, but something deeper kept her planted in place. Running would confirm their accusations in their minds. Leaving would dishonor the memory of those she wore these medals for. A younger man pushed forward, holding up his phone with the screen facing outward. "I am recording all of this," he announced. Raymond Quaid, Channel 7 News. "Ma'am, would you like to comment on these allegations of stolen valor? Do you deny purchasing or otherwise fraudulently obtaining military decorations?" The presence of media changed everything. This was no longer just a confrontation at a local event. This would be news, shared and commented on, her face associated with fraud and dishonor. Vivian felt her chest tighten, breath coming shorter despite her efforts to control it. The walls seemed closer suddenly, the crowd pressing in even though no one had actually moved. No comment, she managed the standard response, buying her a moment to think. Her mind raced through options, each one seeming worse than the last. She could leave and let them think they had driven out a fraud. She could stay and endure more public humiliation with cameras recording every moment. She could try to explain about classified operations and records she could not access, which would only sound like convenient excuses. No comment, Marcus repeated mockingly. That is what they all say when they get caught. Look at her. She will not even defend herself because she knows she cannot. Those medals probably cost her $50 online, and now she thought she could play dress-up at a real veterans event. The insult stung less than the laughter that followed it. Several people in the crowd actually laughed, joining in the mockery as if this were entertainment rather than someone's reputation and honor being destroyed. Vivian looked at their faces and saw no sympathy, no willingness to consider they might be wrong. She saw certainty, righteous anger, the satisfaction of catching a criminal. Bethany touched her arm gently, but firmly, the kind of touch meant to guide someone away. "Miss Thorne, I really think it would be best if you left now. We can discuss this later when things have calmed down, but right now I need to think about the other guests and the purpose of this event. Having you here is creating a distraction from the veterans we're trying to help." The irony was almost crushing. An event meant to support veterans was now being used to drive one away. But Vivian understood Bethany's position even as she resented it. The organizer had sponsors to answer to, a reputation to maintain, donors who might withdraw support if controversy attached itself to the event. In Bethany's calculation, sacrificing one questionable attendee was worth preserving the larger mission. Vivian looked down at Bethany's hand on her arm, then back up at the organizer's face. She saw discomfort there, maybe even a flicker of doubt, but mostly she saw determination to end this situation by the quickest means possible. The path of least resistance always seemed to involve removing the person being accused rather than questioning the accusers. "I am not leaving," Vivian said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt deep in her chest. "I have done nothing wrong, and I will not be driven out by false accusations." Marcus stepped closer, near enough that Vivian could smell the beer on his breath. His face was flushed with anger and something else, something that looked almost like excitement. He was enjoying this, she realized. The attention, the power, the righteousness of his crusade. This was his moment to be important, to be the hero who exposed a fraud. "You are calling me a liar," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "You are standing here in front of all these real veterans, wearing medals you did not earn, and you're calling me a liar. That is stolen valor, sweetheart. That is a federal crime. Maybe we should just call the cops right now and let them sort it out." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Several people in the crowd pulled out their phones, whether to call authorities or simply to capture more footage. Vivian could not tell. The reporter Raymond moved closer with his camera, framing the shot to capture both her face and the medals on her chest. This would be the image people saw, she realized. The accused in the moment of confrontation, looking guilty simply by being accused. A memory flashed unbidden through her mind. The field hospital outside Kandahar, the one that took mortar fire every few days. She had been working on a soldier with shrapnel wounds to his abdomen when the first explosion hit, close enough to shake the tent and send equipment crashing to the floor. The other medics had ducked, some had run for cover, but she had stayed at that table because leaving meant the soldier died. She had kept working through 2 more impacts, her hands steady even as her heart hammered and dust rained down from above. She had been calm then because the mission was clear. Save the life in front of you. Do not think about the mortars, do not think about dying, just focus on the work. But here, now, there was no clear mission. There was only accusation and anger and a crowd that wanted blood. Miss Thorne, Bethany tried again, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. Please, you are making this harder than it needs to be. Just step outside and we can talk about this rationally. There is nothing rational about mob justice, Vivian replied, and saw several faces in the crowd harden at the accusation. But it was true. This was not about evidence or truth. This was about the satisfaction of catching someone, of being right, of exercising power over another person. Mob justice, Marcus repeated with a bitter laugh. Listen to her, acting like she is the victim here. You know who the real victims are? The veterans whose honor you are stealing. The families who lost loved ones while you play dress up. Every person in this room who actually served while you bought some medals online and pretended you earned them. The Gold Star mother spoke up again, her voice cracking with emotion. My son died in Iraq. He was 19 years old. He got a Purple Heart, and I keep in a case in my living room because it is all I have left of him. And you just wear these things like they are jewelry, like they do not mean anything. Vivian felt something crack inside her chest. The woman's pain was real and devastating, and being cast as someone who disrespected that sacrifice was almost unbearable. She wanted to tell this mother that she understood, that she had held dying soldiers and knew the weight of those losses. But classified operations meant no details, no proof, no way to make anyone understand without violating oaths she had taken. I am sorry for your loss, Vivian said softly, meeting the woman's eyes. I know that nothing I say will ease your pain, but please believe me when I tell you that I honor your son's sacrifice. I honor all who gave everything in service to this country. I would never dishonor their memory. Pretty words, Marcus cut in. But words are cheap. Proof is what matters, and you do not have any. So either show us your service records right now, or take off those medals and get out. The crowd pressed closer, a wall of hostile faces and pointing fingers. Vivian felt her vision starting to tunnel again, the edges going dark as her nervous system kicked into high alert. This was how panic attacks started. She knew from experience. First the tunnel vision, then the racing heart, then the feeling of drowning even though she was breathing. She had to regain control, had to find some way to de-escalate before she completely lost her composure in front of cameras and witnesses. Give me 1 hour, she heard herself say. The words came out stronger than she felt. 1 hour to contact someone who can verify my service. If I cannot provide verification within that time, I will leave voluntarily. Marcus scoffed, but Bethany latched onto the suggestion like a lifeline. 1 hour, the organizer repeated quickly. That seems reasonable. We can all take a break, get some refreshments, let cooler heads prevail. Miss Thorne can make her calls, and we can resolve this properly. She's going to run, someone called from the crowd. She will walk out that door and disappear. Raymond, the reporter, stepped forward, his camera still recording. I will stay with her, he offered, though his tone made it clear this was about getting the story rather than ensuring fairness. I will document everything. If she runs, we will have it on film. If she provides proof, we will have that too. Vivian wanted to refuse, wanted to tell them all exactly what they could do with their verification demands. But she was trapped now, committed to a course of action by her own desperate offer. She nodded slowly, accepting the terms of her own temporary parole. Fine, she said. 1 hour. Marcus crossed his arms, a satisfied smirk on his face. 1 hour. And when you cannot prove anything, when you finally admit you are a fraud, I'm going to make sure everyone knows. Every veteran in this state is going to hear about what you try to do here tonight. Vivian moved to a quiet corner of the hall, Raymond the reporter following close behind with his camera trained on her every movement. She could feel dozens of eyes tracking her progress, the weight of their collective judgment pressing down like physical force. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled her phone from her purse, and she hated that the camera would capture that tremor, that visible sign of stress that would be interpreted as guilt. She pulled up her contacts and scrolled through the short list. Most of her military connections had faded over the years, the natural drift that happened when shared experience was classified and could not be discussed. The friendships that survived deployment often could not survive the silence required by security clearances. Her finger hovered over a name, hesitated, then moved on. That person had transferred to a different command. That one had retired and moved overseas. That one she had not spoken to in 2 years. Finally, she selected a number and pressed call. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She ended the call without leaving a message and tried another contact. No answer. A third number rang endlessly, never even reaching voicemail. Vivian felt panic rising in her throat like bile. She had not maintained these relationships the way she should have, too caught up in her own struggles with readjustment and trauma to nurture the connections that might save her now. No luck, Raymond commented, his camera capturing her growing desperation. That does not look good for your case. Vivian ignored him and tried another number, this one for a former commanding officer she had served under during one of her deployments. The call connected, and she felt a surge of hope, but it was immediately crushed when a stranger's voice answered explaining the number had been reassigned. She apologized and ended the call, her chest tightening further. Marcus had gathered a larger crowd now, holding court from across the room. His voice carried clearly in the hushed hall as he explained to newcomers what was happening, his version of events painting Vivian as an opportunistic fraud caught in the act. Some people shook their heads in disgust. Others pulled out their own phones, presumably to spread the news through social media. The story was already taking on a life of its own, growing and mutating with each retelling. Bethany appeared at Vivian's elbow, her face creased with worry lines. "How is it going?" she asked quietly, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I am having trouble reaching anyone," Vivian admitted, hating how defeated she sounded. "Most of my service was classified, which means limited records and even more limited contacts who could discuss it. The people who could verify my record are not easily accessible." Bethany's expression shifted from worry to something closer to resignation. "So you are saying you cannot prove your service?" "I am saying it is complicated." Vivian's voice hardened slightly. "Classification exists for reasons. Operations that never officially happened do not generate the kind of paperwork that makes verification simple. But that does not mean I did not serve. It does not mean I did not earn these medals." The organizer glanced back at Marcus and his growing audience, then at Raymond's ever-present camera. "I understand that your situation might be unique, but you have to see this from my perspective. I have an event full of veterans and their families. I have accusations of stolen valor, and I have a reporter documenting everything. If I let you stay without proof, it looks like I am endorsing fraud. If I ask you to leave, it looks like I am persecuting someone who might be innocent. Either way, my event and my organization's reputation suffers." "So you want me to leave?" Vivian said flatly. "Make your problem disappear. I want you to understand my position." Bethany's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Look, if you really did serve, if those medals are legitimate, then I am deeply sorry for what is happening here. But I have to protect this organization. We do good work supporting veterans, and I cannot let one controversial situation destroy that. Please just go home. We can sort this out later when there are not cameras and crowds." Vivian looked at the woman and saw genuine conflict in her eyes. Bethany probably did believe there was a chance the accusations were wrong, but belief was not enough to overcome institutional self-preservation. The organization mattered more than the individual, a calculation Vivian understood even as it cut deep. Across the room, Marcus's voice rose again. 30 minutes gone and still no proof. You know why? Because there is no proof. Because she is a fraud and we all know it. Time to stop playing games and admit what everyone can already see. A chant started, low at first, but building in volume. Take them off. Take them off. The rhythm was ominous, tribal, the kind of collective voice that stripped away individual thought and replaced it with group momentum. Vivian had heard chants like this before, in different contexts and different languages, and they always preceded violence or violation. Crowds became mobs, became dangers when they found a unified voice and a target. Raymond moved closer, his camera lens nearly touching her shoulder. "This is incredible footage," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "This is going to be the lead story tonight. Stolen valor exposed at Veterans Charity event. The optics are perfect. His casual cruelty, his excitement at her destruction, snapped something in Vivian's composure. She turned to face him directly, her voice cold and controlled. "You're documenting the persecution of a veteran based on accusations without evidence. You're participating in mob justice. Is that the story you want your name attached to?" Raymond's smile did not waver. "I am documenting what is happening. If you're innocent, prove it. If you're guilty, face the consequences. Either way, it is news." Vivian turned away from him and tried 2 more numbers from her contact list. Both went to voicemail. She glanced at the time on her phone. 40 minutes elapsed. 20 minutes remaining before her self-imposed deadline expired, and she would have nothing to show for it. No verification, no proof, no way to defend herself against the growing certainty of the crowd that she was exactly what Marcus accused her of being. The chanting grew louder. "Take them off. Take them off." Marcus had them synchronized now, a chorus of condemnation that filled the hall and drowned out the few voices trying to call for calm. Bethany looked genuinely frightened, her earlier composure cracking as she realized the situation was spiraling beyond her control. She grabbed Vivian's arm, this time with urgency rather than gentle guidance. "You need to leave right now," Bethany hissed, her fingers digging into Vivian's arm with surprising strength. "This is getting dangerous. I'm calling security to escort you out before someone gets hurt." The chanting had reached a fever pitch, the crowd pulsing with collective energy that seemed to feed on itself. "Take them off. Take them off." Fists pumped in the air with each repetition, faces contorted with righteous anger. Vivian recognized the signs of a situation about to turn physical, had seen it in riot situations overseas where crowds transformed from people into forces of nature. Marcus stood at the center like a conductor orchestrating chaos, his arms raised to encourage the volume. When he finally lowered his hands for silence, the crowd obeyed immediately, proving how completely he had assumed control. The sudden quiet was more unsettling than the noise had been. "Time is up," Marcus announced, his voice carrying across the hall with theatrical authority. "No proof, no verification, no one willing to vouch for her, because no one can. Because those medals are fake, and we all know it. Now I'm going to ask one more time nicely. Take off those medals and leave with whatever dignity you have left." Vivian stood frozen, her phone still clutched in her hand. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to escape this nightmare before it got worse. But another part of her, the part that had stayed at that operating table while mortars fell, refused to move. Running meant admitting guilt in their eyes. Running meant dishonoring every soldier whose memory those medals represented. "I earned these," she said, her voice barely audible over the ambient tension in the room. "Every single one of them. I bled for them. I watched friends die for them. I will not remove them because a mob demands it." Marcus's face darkened. "You just will not quit, will you? You're going to stand there and lie to the faces of real veterans. You're going to spit on everything we sacrificed. Fine. If you will not take them off, maybe someone needs to help you." He started forward, and the crowd parted for him like water. Vivian's training kicked in automatically, her stance shifting subtly to something more defensive, weight-balanced, hands coming up slightly. She could defend herself if necessary, had been trained in close-quarters combat as part of her medical corps deployment preparation. But laying hands on her accuser, even in self-defense, would only cement her guilt in every witness's mind. Marcus reached for the bronze star pinned to her chest, and Vivian stepped back sharply. "Do not touch me," she said, her voice carrying the snap of command she had once used in emergency situations. "That is assault. Assault!" Marcus laughed harshly, but his hand had stopped midair. "You're worried about assault while committing federal crimes. That is rich." Security finally arrived, two men in black polo shirts with the venue's logo who looked overwhelmed by the size and energy of the crowd. Bethany rushed to them, speaking rapidly and gesturing between Vivian and Marcus. The guards exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about how to handle a situation that had already escalated far beyond a simple disturbance. "Ma'am," one of the guards addressed Vivian, his tone attempting professional neutrality. "We're going to need you to come with us. For everyone's safety, including your own." "I have not done anything wrong," Vivian said, hating the pleading note that crept into her voice. "I am being falsely accused, and you are removing me instead of the people threatening assault." The guard's expression showed sympathy, but his resolve did not waver. "That may be true, ma'am, but right now we have a situation that needs to be de-escalated. The best way to do that is for you to leave the premises. You can file a complaint with management later, but right now we need you to go." Vivian looked around the hall at the sea of hostile faces. A few people looked uncomfortable, uncertain, but no one spoke up in her defense. The older veteran who had nodded respectfully to her earlier was looking at the floor, unwilling to meet her eyes. The young woman who had chatted with her about deployment experiences had melted back into the crowd, her association with the accused too risky to maintain. Raymond moved closer with his camera, capturing what he clearly believed would be the moment of final defeat. The security guards reaching for her arms, the accused being escorted out in disgrace. The satisfying conclusion to a story of fraud exposed. His lens focused on the medals on her chest, zooming in to capture them in detail before they disappeared from public view forever. "Wait!" A voice called from near the entrance. "Everyone wait." The crowd turned toward the sound, momentarily distracted from their target. An older man was pushing through the gathered people, moving with the careful determination of someone who had earned respect through years of service. He wore a Vietnam veteran's cap and walked with a slight limp, one hand gripping a cane for support. "I know this woman," the man said, his voice gravelly but firm. "Or at least I know of her. My grandson served in the same theater, different unit, but overlapping operations." He mentioned a medic named Thorne who saved half his squad when they took heavy fire. Said she was recommended for the Silver Star, but the mission got classified and the paperwork disappeared into the black. Marcus whirled on the older man. "With all due respect, sir, your grandson's story does not prove anything. Lots of medics named Thorne probably served. That does not mean this woman is the one he mentioned. It does not mean those medals are real." The old veteran's eyes narrowed. "I did not say it proved anything. I said maybe we should consider the possibility that we are making a terrible mistake here. Maybe we should think twice before we destroy someone's honor based on assumptions and anger." "She has had an hour to prove herself," Marcus shot back. "An hour, and she could not produce a single person to verify her service. That tells us everything we need to know." "No," Vivian said quietly, finding her voice again. "It tells you that classified operations create complications with verification. It tells you that not everything in military service fits neatly into the categories you expect. It tells you that some of us served in ways we cannot talk about, in places that officially do not exist, doing things that never made it into public records." "Convenient," someone muttered from the crowd, and several people laughed. The laughter cut through whatever small hope the old veteran's words had created. Marcus seized the momentum, his voice rising with renewed confidence. "Classified operations. Black ops. Convenient excuses for people who get caught lying. I have heard it all before from every fraud I have ever exposed. They always have some reason why they cannot prove their service. Always some story about secret missions that conveniently cannot be verified." The security guards moved closer to Vivian, their body language making it clear the conversation was over. "Ma'am," one of them said again, more firmly this time, "you need to leave now. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but either way, you're leaving." Vivian felt something inside her finally break. Not her resolve, but her resistance to the inevitable outcome. She had fought as hard as she could, had maintained her dignity in the face of humiliation, had tried every avenue available to prove what she knew to be true. But some battles could not be won through determination alone. Sometimes the universe aligned against you, and all you could do was accept defeat with whatever grace remained. "Fine," she said quietly, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I will go." The crowd erupted in approval, a mixture of cheers and applause, as if justice had been served. Marcus raised his arms in victory, accepting congratulations from those around him like a champion who had defended the honor of all veterans. Bethany looked relieved, her face relaxing now that the crisis was being resolved. Raymond kept his camera trained on Vivian, capturing every moment of her surrender for the evening news. Vivian reached up slowly, her fingers trembling as they touched the bronze star pinned to her jacket. The metal was cool under her fingertips, solid and real, and earned through actions that haunted her dreams. She thought of the firefight that had earned it, the impossible decision to stay exposed, treating casualties while rounds cracked past her head. She thought of the citation she had received in a ceremony she barely remembered through the haze of exhaustion and trauma. Her hand moved to the Purple Heart, the medal that represented blood spilled and pain endured. She had 3 of them actually, from 3 separate injuries in 3 different deployments, but she only wore one because wearing all of them felt like showing off. The irony struck her now that her attempt at modesty was being interpreted as fraud. Before she could unpin the first medal, a commotion erupted at the main entrance. The double doors swung open with enough force to bang against the walls, the sound sharp enough to cut through the celebration. Everyone turned toward the noise, curiosity overtaking triumph. 2 men in dark suits entered first, their movements precise and coordinated in a way that screamed military or federal training. They scanned the room with professional efficiency, their eyes cataloging threats and exits and crowd density. One spoke quietly into a radio clipped to his collar, his words inaudible but his intent clear. He was calling someone in. Behind the advance team came more personnel, all wearing identical dark suits and moving with the same controlled precision. They formed a corridor from the entrance deeper into the hall, their positioning creating a clear path through the confused crowd. People stepped back instinctively, responding to the authority these newcomers projected without need for words or badges. "What is going on?" Bethany whispered, her earlier relief transforming back into anxiety. "Who are these people?" No one answered because no one knew. The security guards who had been about to escort Vivian out now stood frozen, uncertain whether they still had authority in a situation that had clearly escalated beyond their jurisdiction. Marcus's triumphant expression faltered, replaced by confusion and a hint of concern. Even Raymond lowered his camera slightly, professional instinct telling him something significant was about to happen. The corridor of suited personnel remained at attention, all eyes facing the entrance. The crowd had gone completely silent, the earlier noise and chaos evaporating in the face of this new, unknown element. Vivian stood where she was, her hands still resting on her medals, equally confused but feeling a strange flutter of something that might have been hope. A vehicle engine rumbled outside, deeper and more powerful than typical civilian cars. Through the open doors, Vivian could see black SUVs pulling up to the curb, their windows tinted dark enough to hide the occupants. The vehicles had government plates and the kind of armor reinforcement that marked them as official transport for high-ranking personnel. The rear door of the lead SUV opened and a figure emerged, backlit by the parking lot lights so that details were momentarily obscured. But even in silhouette, the posture was unmistakable. Rigid spine, squared shoulders, the bearing of someone who had commanded others for decades and expected immediate obedience. As the figure moved toward the entrance, details resolved themselves. The uniform was dress blues, perfectly pressed with creases sharp enough to cut. Silver stars gleamed on the shoulders, 3 of them arranged in a triangle that designated a rank most people would never personally encounter. Ribbons covered the left breast in neat rows, a career's worth of service and commendation compressed into colored fabric. The officer's shoes reflected the overhead lights, polished to a mirror shine that spoke of discipline and attention to detail. Lieutenant General Helena Brightwell entered the community center like she was inspecting troops, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. She was perhaps 60, her hair steel gray, and cut in a practical style that required minimal maintenance. Her face showed the weathering of decades in service, lines earned through stress and responsibility and decisions that affected thousands of lives. The suited personnel snapped to attention as she passed, their synchronization perfect. Bethany actually took a step backward, her mouth slightly open in shock. Marcus had gone pale, his earlier bravado evaporating as he realized he was suddenly very small in the presence of very real authority. The old veteran who had spoken up for Vivian straightened despite his limp, his hand moving unconsciously toward a salute before he caught himself, and simply stood at attention. General Brightwell's eyes continued their sweep of the room, cataloging the scene with professional efficiency. The crowd pressed against the walls, the security guards in their civilian uniforms, the reporter with his camera, Bethany with her event coordinator badge, Marcus frozen in place with guilt written across his features. And finally, inevitably, her gaze landed on Vivian. The general's expression shifted, something that might have been recognition or relief or anger flickering across her weathered features. She altered her path, moving directly toward Vivian with purpose, her entourage maintaining formation around her. The crowd parted automatically, people stumbling over each other to clear a path for the three-star general crossing the room. No one spoke. No one moved unnecessarily. The weight of real authority had entered the space, and everyone felt it pressing down, demanding respect and obedience without a single word being spoken. General Brightwell stopped 3 feet from Vivian, close enough that the lower-ranking woman could see the individual ribbons on the general's chest, each one representing campaigns and commendations that spanned decades of distinguished service. The general's eyes, sharp and assessing despite her age, studied Vivian's face with an intensity that made the younger woman feel simultaneously exposed and protected. "Corporal Thorne," the general said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent hall despite not being raised. "Still drawing attention wherever you go, I see." The words could have been a reprimand, but the slight softening at the corners of the general's eyes suggested something closer to exasperated affection. Vivian felt tears prickling unexpectedly, the relief of recognition after an hour of being treated like a criminal nearly overwhelming her carefully maintained composure. "General Brightwell," Vivian managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I did not know you were in the area." "I was not," the general replied. "I was in Washington for briefings when I received a rather frantic call from an old colleague who monitors social media for potential security breaches. Imagine my surprise when I saw footage of one of my former medics being accused of stolen valor at a charity event. I commandeered a helicopter and flew here immediately because some situations require immediate attention." She said the last part loud enough for the entire room to hear, her gaze sweeping across the crowd with an expression that could have frozen lava. The suited personnel around her maintained their positions, creating a barrier between the general and the crowd that no one seemed inclined to cross. Marcus found his voice, though it came out weaker than his earlier proclamations. "General, ma'am, with all due respect, this woman has been unable to provide any verification of her service. She claims to have earned these medals, but cannot produce a single document or witness to support her claims. We were simply trying to protect the honor of real veterans." The general's attention swiveled to Marcus like a weapon targeting an enemy. Her expression did not change, but something in her bearing made the man take an involuntary step backward. She walked slowly toward him, each footfall deliberate, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture that conveyed both authority and barely restrained anger. "And who are you?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Marcus Pettigrew, ma'am. I serve in the National Guard, and I have made it my mission to expose stolen valor wherever I find it. I have caught dozens of frauds over the years, people who dishonor real veterans by wearing medals they did not earn." "The National Guard," the general repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Did you deploy, Mr. Pettigrew?" "I was ready to deploy," Marcus said, his defensiveness showing. "My unit was on standby for activation, but ultimately we were not called up. But that does not mean I do not understand what service means, what sacrifice looks like." General Brightwell nodded slowly, as if considering his words carefully. "So to be clear, you have never been in combat. You have never been shot at. You have never held a dying soldier in your arms. You have never made decisions where lives hung in the balance. But you have appointed yourself judge and jury over someone who has done all of those things and more." The crowd had grown even quieter, if such a thing was possible. Several people who had been loudly supporting Marcus moments earlier were now studying the floor or the walls, anywhere but the confrontation unfolding before them. Raymond the reporter had his camera up again, but his hand was shaking slightly, aware he was capturing something far more significant than the story he had expected. "I was protecting the integrity of military decorations." Marcus tried again, but his voice had lost all its earlier conviction. "You were leading a mob," the general corrected sharply. "You were conducting a public persecution based on assumptions and ignorance. You were about to physically assault a decorated combat veteran because she could not immediately prove her service to your satisfaction. Do you have any idea how many operations in the past 2 decades have been classified? How many service members have records that cannot be easily accessed? How much sacrifice has happened in shadows that people like you will never see or understand?" She let the questions hang unanswered, her gaze moving from Marcus to sweep across the entire crowd. Every person who had been chanting, who had been calling for Vivian's removal, who had participated in the mob mentality, found themselves under that withering assessment. Bethany stepped forward, her voice wavering. "General, I apologize if we made a mistake. As the event organizer, I was trying to handle a difficult situation. I had to consider the concerns of all our guests and the reputation of our organization. You chose the easy path," the general said, not unkindly, but without absolution. "You chose to side with the loud voices rather than asking hard questions. You chose to remove the accused rather than examining the accusers. I understand the pressures you faced, but understanding does not equal approval." The general turned back to Vivian, her expression softening again. "Are you all right, Corporal? Did anyone harm you?" "No, ma'am," Vivian said quietly. "Threatened, humiliated, but not harmed." "Small mercies," the general murmured. Then louder, addressing the room again. "Since you all seem so interested in verification, let me provide it. Corporal Vivian Thorne served under my command during 3 separate deployments. Her service record is partially classified due to the nature of operations she participated in, operations that officially never happened in places we officially never were. What I can tell you is that she is one of the finest combat medics I have ever had the privilege of commanding." The general's words carried the weight of absolute authority, each sentence landing like a judge's gavel. Marcus had backed away several more steps, his face now completely drained of color. The Gold Star mother who had spoken against Vivian earlier had tears running down her cheeks, her hand pressed to her mouth. The old Vietnam veteran who had tried to speak up for Vivian was nodding slowly, vindication mixed with sorrow on his weathered face. "These medals she wears," General Brightwell continued, gesturing toward Vivian's chest. "I personally recommended her for several of them. I wrote the citations. I pinned them to her uniform in field ceremonies conducted under conditions most of you cannot imagine. And if any of you doubt my word, you are welcome to contact the Pentagon and verify my authority to make these statements." No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was Raymond's camera continuing to record, capturing every moment of a story that had transformed completely from what he had expected. General Brightwell moved back to stand beside Vivian, her presence both shield and validation. She reached out and gently touched the bronze star pinned to Vivian's jacket, her fingers tracing the edge of the metal with something approaching reverence. "This one," the general said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent hall. "She earned this outside a village whose name I still cannot speak, during an operation that does not exist in any official record." Her convoy was ambushed. The lead vehicle hit an IED. For soldiers critically wounded, 2 of them trapped in a burning Humvee. Corporal Thorne ran in a fire, literal fire, to pull those men out while insurgents hammered their position with small arms and RPGs. The general paused, her jaw tightening with the memory. "I was there. I saw her work under conditions that would have broken most people. She triaged 4 critical casualties while rounds were still incoming, made impossible decisions about who to treat first, kept all 4 alive long enough to get them to a field hospital. 2 of those soldiers are alive today because of her actions. They have children now, families, futures they would not have without her courage." Vivian felt tears spilling down her cheeks, the memories flooding back despite her best efforts to contain them. She could smell the burning fuel, hear the screaming, feel the heat of flames on her face as she dragged Sergeant Kowalski from the wreckage. The general's hand found hers and squeezed briefly, a gesture of support between warriors who had shared hell together. "The Purple Hearts," General Brightwell continued, touching the metal with its distinctive purple ribbon and gold border. "She has 3 of them, though she only wears 1. The first was from shrapnel during a mortar attack on a forward operating base. She was in the middle of surgery when the mortars started falling. She stayed at that table, kept working, even after shrapnel tore through the tent and caught her in the shoulder and side. Finished the surgery, saved the patient, then finally let someone else treat her wounds." The Gold Star mother made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Her hand was still pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror at what she had participated in. Others in the crowd were crying too, the reality of their actions settling over them like ash. Her second Purple Heart came from a vehicle rollover during a mission I can discuss even less than the others. Broke 3 ribs, punctured a lung, still managed to treat 2 other soldiers who were injured worse than she was. Refused evacuation until everyone else was stable. Her third came from a sniper round that caught her in the leg while she was treating a wounded Afghan interpreter. She took that round because she refused to leave the interpreter exposed, kept working even with a bullet in her thigh until she had stabilized him enough for transport. General Brightwell moved on to the next medal, her voice taking on an edge that made it clear she was furious at having to defend a soldier who should never have needed defending. The Combat Medical Badge. Every combat medic dreams of earning this, because it means they performed their duties under fire. Corporal Thorne earned hers in her first deployment and proved worthy of it in every deployment that followed. She ran toward danger when everyone else was running away. She stood her ground when withdrawal would have been not only reasonable, but expected. Marcus had sunken down into a chair, his face buried in his hands. Several people who had been standing near him had quietly moved away, distancing themselves from the ringleader of what was now clearly revealed as an atrocity of judgment. Bethany looked physically ill, her earlier pragmatism transformed into visible regret. "The Silver Star," the general said, her voice softening slightly as she touched the medal at the center of Vivian's display. "This one was the hardest for me to write the citation for, because how do you capture in words what I witnessed that day? We were providing medical support to a special operations team conducting raids in a contested area. The situation went sideways fast. The team took heavy casualties and was pinned down with no immediate extraction available." She paused, collecting herself before continuing. "Corporal Thorne volunteered to go in with a quick reaction force. Not ordered, volunteered. She spent 8 hours under sustained enemy fire, treating casualties in a partially collapsed building while insurgents tried to overrun the position. She performed field surgery with equipment meant for stabilization, made supplies last 3 times longer than they should have, kept 14 wounded soldiers alive through sheer determination and skill. When extraction finally arrived, she was the last one out, refused to leave until every wounded soldier was evacuated first. The general's voice had grown rough with emotion. 14 soldiers went home to their families because of her. 14 men who write to her on holidays, who name their children after her, who carry guilt because they lived while she carries trauma from saving them. That is what this silver star represents. That is what you people were demanding she remove and discard like trash. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. Every person in that hall was confronting the magnitude of what they had participated in or witnessed. The mob justice they had cheered. The persecution of a genuine hero based on nothing but suspicion and the loud voice of a man who had never faced combat himself. Raymond, the reporter, had lowered his camera, his face pale and shocked. This was still a story, perhaps an even bigger one than he had anticipated, but the triumphant tone he had expected was completely inverted. He was no longer documenting the exposure of a fraud. He was documenting the exposure of a profound injustice. General Brightwell turned to address the entire room, her command voice cutting through the heavy atmosphere. Corporal Thorne asked for 1 hour to provide verification of her service. You gave her that hour, then spent it mocking her inability to immediately produce classified records. You chanted for her humiliation. You threatened her with assault and arrest. You treated a decorated combat veteran like a criminal because she could not prove to your satisfaction that she had earned the right to wear the medals that cost her blood and sanity and years of her life dealing with trauma most of you cannot comprehend. She let that sink in before continuing. I want everyone in this room to understand something. Stolen valor is real, and it is offensive, and it deserves to be called out. But what happened here tonight was not justice. It was a lynch mob. It was persecution based on ignorance and assumptions. And every single person who participated should be deeply ashamed. The general's condemnation hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. She surveyed the crowd with eyes that had assessed far more dangerous situations than this. But the disappointment in her expression cut deeper than any anger could have. These were supposed to be people who understood military service, who honored sacrifice, yet they had become exactly what they claimed to fight against. I want to tell you about the cost of what Corporal Thorne did, General Brightwell continued, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. The medals tell part of the story, but they do not capture everything. They do not show the nightmares that wake her up at 3 in the morning. They do not show the panic attacks triggered by loud noises or crowds. They do not show the survivor's guilt she carries because she lived while others died despite her best efforts. Vivian closed her eyes, not wanting to hear her private struggles laid bare before strangers, but understanding why the general was doing it. These people needed to understand the full weight of their actions, needed to see not just the heroism, but the price paid for it. After her 3rd deployment, the general said, Corporal Thorne was diagnosed with severe PTSD and a traumatic brain injury from repeated exposure to explosions. She spent 18 months in treatment, learning to function again in a world without mortars and gunfire. She was medically retired from service, something that devastated her, because being a combat medic was not just what she did, but who she was. The military gave her purpose and took it away at the same time. The general moved slightly, positioning herself more directly between Vivian and the crowd, as if even now she was protecting her former soldier. She rarely wears her medals because they draw attention, and attention triggers her anxiety. She came here tonight despite that anxiety because this event was supposed to support veterans, and she believed she would be among people who understood. Instead, she was subjected to the exact kind of mob judgment that veterans with PTSD fear most. Marcus lifted his head from his hands, his face streaked with tears. General, I did not know. I thought I was protecting the integrity of military service. I have exposed real frauds before, people who were lying, and I thought this was the same. Your intentions do not erase your actions, the general said coldly. You assumed guilt without evidence. You organized a mob without verification. You were prepared to physically remove her medals based on nothing but your own certainty. The road to atrocity is paved with people who thought they were doing the right thing. She turned to Bethany next, who flinched under that penetrating gaze. And you, as the organizer, had a responsibility to de-escalate this situation rather than facilitate it. You could have separated the parties. You could have contacted military records offices. You could have asked for actual evidence of fraud rather than accepting accusations at face value. Instead, you chose the path of least resistance and asked the victim to leave. Bethany's voice came out as barely a whisper. I am so sorry. I failed in my duty to support all veterans. I let the situation spiral out of control because I was worried about the organization's reputation. There is no excuse for what I allowed to happen here. The general acknowledged the apology with a slight nod, but offered no absolution. Words of regret do not undo damage. They are simply the first step toward making amends. She looked back at Vivian, her expression softening again. Corporal, do you want to press charges? Assault was threatened. You were subjected to harassment and public humiliation. You have grounds for legal action. Vivian opened her eyes and took a shaky breath. She looked at Marcus, broken and crying in his chair. She looked at Bethany, pale and shaking with the weight of her failure. She looked at the crowd of people who moments ago had been calling for her removal, but now stood silent with shame written across their faces. No, she said quietly. No charges. They made a mistake based on incomplete information. They thought they were protecting something important. I do not agree with their methods, and I will never forget what happened here tonight. But I do not want to destroy their lives over it. The general studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That is more mercy than they deserve, but it is your choice to make. However, she continued, turning back to the crowd, there will be consequences. Mr. Pettigrew, I will be contacting the leadership of every Stolen Valor watchdog group I can identify to inform them of what happened here tonight. Your crusade ends now. If I hear of you publicly accusing another veteran without absolute proof, I will make it my personal mission to ensure you face every legal consequence available. Marcus nodded miserably, accepting the sentence. The general moved on to Raymond, who had been standing frozen with his camera, caught between journalistic duty and human shame. And you, reporter, you came here hoping to capture Stolen Valor exposed. Instead, you captured the persecution of a genuine hero. I expect your story will reflect the truth of what actually happened here, not the narrative you were constructing before I arrived. Raymond found his voice, though it lacked his earlier confidence. Yes, ma'am. The story will be about injustice revealed and corrected, not about stolen valor. You have my word. Your word, the general repeated skeptically. We will see. Journalism should seek truth, not sensationalism. Perhaps tonight taught you something about rushing to judgment. She turned in a slow circle, making eye contact with as many people as possible. To everyone here who participated in this persecution, who chanted and called for her removal, who assumed guilt without evidence, I want you to remember this moment. Remember how certain you were. Remember how righteous you felt. And remember how completely wrong you were. Let that inform how you approach similar situations in the future. The old Vietnam veteran who had tried to speak up for Vivian stepped forward, his cane tapping against the floor. General, if I may. He paused, collecting his thoughts. My grandson did mention Corporal Thorne, not by name, but by deed. He told me about a medic who saved his entire squad, who stayed exposed under fire to treat the wounded. He said she was the bravest person he had ever met. When I heard the accusations tonight, I should have spoken up stronger. I should have demanded evidence before allowing judgment. I failed her too. The general's expression softened slightly toward the old veteran. You tried, which is more than most people here can say. But yes, we all have a responsibility to question mob mentality when we see it forming. Military service should teach us that, but sometimes we forget in the heat of the moment. Vivian felt exhausted suddenly, drained by the emotional whiplash of the past 2 hours. From pleasant evening to nightmare accusation to dramatic rescue, her nervous system had been through too many extremes. She swayed slightly, and the general immediately steadied her, one hand on her elbow. That is enough, General Brightwell said firmly. Corporal Thorne has been through enough tonight. We are leaving. Bethany, I trust you will handle any media inquiries appropriately. Mr. Pettigrew, stay away from Corporal Thorne permanently. Everyone else, I suggest you spend some time reflecting on what happened here and how you can ensure it never happens again. The general guided Vivian toward the exit, the suited security personnel forming a protective corridor around them. As they moved through the hall, people stepped back respectfully, some with heads bowed in shame, others with tears still streaming down their faces. The atmosphere had transformed completely from the hostile energy that had filled the space an hour earlier. Wait, a voice called out. The Gold Star mother was pushing through the crowd, her face blotchy from crying. She stopped a few feet away, wringing her hands. Please, I need to apologize. I need you to know how deeply sorry I am for what I said, for doubting you. My son died serving this country, and I thought I was honoring his memory by supporting the accusation. But all I did was dishonor another person who served with the same courage he did. Vivian stopped, the general's hand still supporting her elbow. She looked at the grieving mother and saw genuine anguish in the woman's eyes, pain that went deeper than tonight's events. Your son's sacrifice was real and worthy of honor, Vivian said gently. You were protecting his memory the best way you knew how. I understand that, even if it hurt to be on the receiving end of it. The woman took a hesitant step closer. He was 19, just a baby really. He joined the army because he wanted to make a difference, to serve something bigger than himself. And he did, but it cost him everything. When I saw you wearing those medals, I thought you were mocking everything he died for. But you were honoring it, just like I try to honor his memory every day. Your son will be proud of how much you love him, Vivian said, her voice thick with emotion. That love does not diminish just because you made a mistake tonight. We all make mistakes when we're trying to protect something we care about. The mother reached out tentatively, and Vivian allowed the embrace, feeling the woman's shoulders shake with sobs against her. I am so sorry, the mother whispered. I am so sorry. When they separated, the general handed the woman a card. If you ever need support, resources for Gold Star families, or just someone who understands military loss, contact my office. We take care of our own, even when mistakes have been made. The old Vietnam veteran approached next, moving slowly with his cane. Corporal, he said, his voice gravelly with age and emotion. What happened tonight brought back memories of how we were treated when we came home from Vietnam. Being accused, being judged, being called things we were not. I should have done more to stop it when I saw it happening to you. I'm sorry I did not stand up stronger. You tried, Vivian said, remembering his lone voice attempting to inject doubt into the mob's certainty. That took courage when everyone else was caught up in the moment. Thank you for that. The veteran straightened as much as his aged spine allowed and rendered a proper salute. Vivian returned it. The gesture connecting two people separated by decades, but united by understanding of what service truly meant. The general watched the exchange and nodded approvingly. As they continued toward the exit, several other people attempted to approach with apologies. The general allowed some through, but cut off others with a sharp look that communicated her judgment of their sincerity. Not everyone deserved immediate absolution, her bearing suggested. Some would need to live with their shame and let time determine if they had learned anything. Bethany caught up with them just before they reached the doors. General, Corporal Thorne, I know my apology means little right now, but I want you to know that I will be implementing new protocols for our organization. Training on how to handle accusations appropriately. Procedures for verification before judgment. This should never have happened, and I will do everything in my power to ensure it never happens again. See that you do, the general said curtly, and I will be checking. This organization does important work, but tonight proved you need better systems in place. Do not let this be a lesson you forget once the immediate shame fades. They stepped out into the cool night air, the parking lot lights casting long shadows across the pavement. The black SUVs waited with engines running, the security personnel moving efficiently to open doors and secure the perimeter. Vivian took a deep breath, filling her lungs with clean air that did not carry the weight of accusation and mob anger. Thank you, she said to the general as they walked toward the vehicles. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not arrived. I was about to take off my medals and leave in disgrace." General Brightwell stopped and turned to face her, both hands now resting on Vivian's shoulders. "Listen to me, Corporal. What happened in there was not your fault. You did nothing wrong. You showed up to support fellow veterans while managing your own trauma, and you were subjected to persecution that no one should ever face. You maintained your dignity and composure under circumstances that would have broken lesser people." "I felt broken," Vivian admitted. "I felt like maybe they were right, like maybe I did not deserve to wear these medals because of how damaged I am now compared to who I was then." The general's grip tightened slightly. "The medals recognize what you did, not what you became afterward. Every decoration you wore was earned through actions that saved lives and demonstrated extraordinary courage. PTSD does not erase those actions. Medical retirement does not invalidate your service. You are a war hero whether you feel like one or not." Vivian felt fresh tears coming and did not try to stop them. The general pulled her into an embrace that was both commanding officer checking on her soldier and older woman comforting someone who had been wounded. They stood that way for a long moment while the security personnel maintained respectful distance. When they separated, the general studied Vivian's face with concern. "I am taking you to a hotel tonight, not sending you home alone. One of my aides will stay with you to make sure you are okay. Tomorrow we will discuss next steps, including whether you want to file formal complaints or pursue any other actions. But tonight, you just need to rest and process what happened." "I do not know if I can sleep," Vivian said honestly. "Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces, hear their accusations." "I know," the general said with understanding born of experience. "But you are not alone. You have people who know your worth, who understand what you have done, who will stand with you. That mob in there had power for a moment, but they do not define you. Your actions define you, and your actions have been consistently heroic." They moved toward the waiting vehicle, but before Vivian could climb in, she heard running footsteps behind them. Raymond, a reporter, was jogging across the parking lot, his camera lowered respectfully. He stopped a dozen feet away, breathing hard. "Corporal Thorne," he called out, "I know you have no reason to trust me or speak to me after how I behaved in there. But I want you to know that I'm going to make this right. The story I file will tell the truth about what happened, about mob justice and rushed judgment, and the persecution of a genuine hero. I cannot undo my part in what happened, but I can at least ensure the public record reflects reality." The general looked at Vivian, letting her make the decision about whether to respond. Vivian studied the reporter for a moment, seeing genuine remorse in his expression. "Make sure you include how quickly people turned without evidence," she said finally. "Make sure your story asks readers to question their own certainty before they join a mob. If something good can come from tonight, let it be that lesson." Raymond nodded emphatically. "I will. You have my word. And for what is worth, I am truly sorry for my part in this." He turned and walked back toward the community center, his shoulders slumped with the weight of what he had witnessed and participated in. The general helped Vivian into the SUV, then climbed in beside her. The door closed with a solid thunk that seemed to seal them away from the nightmare of the past 2 hours. The SUV pulled away from the community center, leaving behind the building that had transformed from welcoming venue to hostile courtroom to site of redemption, all in the span of 2 hours. Vivian watched through the tinted window as the facility receded into the distance, its lit windows growing smaller until they disappeared around a corner. Inside the vehicle, the general sat beside her in comfortable silence, understanding that sometimes the best support was simply presence without demands for conversation. The suited security personnel in the front seats remained professionally quiet, their eyes on the road and mirrors, ever vigilant even though the immediate crisis had passed. After several minutes, Vivian finally spoke. "How did you know to come? How did you even find out what was happening?" The general smiled slightly, a hint of her command efficiency showing through. "I have people who monitor social media for potential security issues involving personnel from classified operations. When footage started appearing of a former member of my medical team being accused of stolen valor with her face and medals visible, it triggered immediate alerts. I was in the middle of a Pentagon briefing when I got the call. "You left a briefing with Joint Chiefs to come rescue me," Vivian said, the magnitude of that decision settling over her. Without hesitation, the general confirmed. "Some things are more important than briefings. One of my soldiers was under attack and needed support. That is not a calculation that requires much thought. You would have done the same if our positions were reversed." Vivian nodded slowly, knowing it was true. The bonds forged in combat were not something that faded with time or discharge papers. They were permanent, etched into the soul by shared experience that civilians could never fully understand. She thought of the soldiers she had treated, the ones she had saved and the ones she had lost, and knew she would drop everything to help any of them if they needed her. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Does this follow me forever? Do I become a veteran who was accused of stolen valor, even though I was vindicated?" The general considered the question carefully. "Some people will remember only the accusation, yes. The internet has a long memory, and not everyone will see the resolution. But many more will see the truth. Raymond's story will spread. My statement carries weight in military circles. And most importantly, you know the truth. The people who matter know the truth." She paused, then continued with quiet intensity. "I have spent decades in military service, Corporal. I have seen genuine stolen valor, and it makes me furious because it dishonors real sacrifice. But I have also seen good people falsely accused, lives destroyed by mob justice and social media witch hunts. What happened to you tonight represents everything wrong with how we sometimes treat accusations in the age of instant sharing and permanent recording." "Do you think Marcus really believed he was doing the right thing?" Vivian asked. "Or was it about power and attention?" "Probably both," the general said thoughtfully. "I think he started with genuine motivation to protect military honor. But somewhere along the way it became about his importance, his role as watchdog and protector. He never deployed, never saw combat, and I suspect part of him feels inadequate compared to those who did. Catching frauds gave him a way to feel superior, to have power over something related to military service, even though he never had that experience himself." The SUV turned onto a main road, heading toward the hotel where Vivian would spend the night under watchful protection. The city lights blurred past, normal people going about normal Saturday evenings with no idea of the drama that had unfolded at the community center. "I almost took them off," Vivian confessed, her voice breaking slightly. "My medals. I was going to remove them and walk away because it seemed easier than continuing to fight. I felt so alone in that moment, surrounded by all those hostile faces, and I just wanted it to stop. But you did not," the general pointed out. "You were about to, but even at your lowest moment, you held on long enough for help to arrive. That is not weakness, Corporal. That is strength. Knowing when to ask for help, knowing when to wait for reinforcements, is as important as knowing when to fight." Vivian wiped her eyes, exhausted, but feeling something loosening in her chest that had been tight since the accusations began. "I kept thinking about Corporal Daniels and the others, about whether they would be disappointed in me for being too damaged to defend their memory properly." The general's voice turned fierce. "Those soldiers knew you, fought beside you, lived because of you. Not one of them would judge you for struggling with trauma from the very experiences that saved their lives. Daniels, Kowalski, Chun, all the others we lost, and those we saved, they would be furious at what happened tonight. But they would also be proud of how you handled it with dignity and mercy." The vehicle pulled into the parking lot of an upscale hotel, the kind used for military VIPs and government business. The security personnel moved efficiently, one checking in while another opened doors and scanned the surroundings. The general guided Vivian through the lobby to an elevator that took them to a secure floor. The suite was spacious and quiet, windows overlooking the city, but with privacy screens and security features built into the design. One of the general's aides, a competent-looking woman in her 30s, was already setting up in the adjoining room. She nodded respectfully to both officers as they entered. "Major Reeves will be here all night," the general explained. "If you need anything, medical support, someone to talk to, anything at all, she will handle it. I will be staying in the city overnight, and we'll check on you in the morning. We will have breakfast and discuss next steps." Vivian nodded, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion settling over her. The adrenaline that had kept her functioning through the ordeal was draining away, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. She sat heavily on the couch, her hands resting on her knees, still wearing the jacket with its metals that had caused so much pain tonight. The general sat beside her, taking one of her hands. "I need you to hear something, Corporal. What happened tonight was not the end of your story. It was one very bad chapter, but you have many more chapters ahead of you. You survived combat. You survived PTSD. You will survive this too. And maybe, just maybe, some good will come from it. Maybe Marcus will think twice before his next accusation. Maybe Bethany will implement better protocols. Maybe Raymond's story will make others pause before joining a mob. If this story moved you, drop a comment and let us know your favorite moment, or if you have ever witnessed someone being misjudged before the truth came out. Share your thoughts about how we can better support veterans and question our own certainty before making accusations." Vivian squeezed the general's hand, drawing strength from the connection. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing me as I really am when everyone else saw only what they assumed. I will always see you as you are," the general promised. A decorated combat medic who saved countless lives. A soldier who served with distinction in the most difficult circumstances. A human being who deserves respect and support. Those truths do not change based on the opinions of people who never knew you. She stood, preparing to leave Vivian to rest. "Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow we will deal with the aftermath properly. But tonight, just let yourself be safe. You are protected here. No one will judge you or accuse you. You can finally breathe." After the general left, Vivian sat alone in the quiet suite, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. She carefully unpinned her medals one by one, laying them on the table before her. Each one caught the light, small pieces of metal that represented so much pain and pride and sacrifice. She touched each one gently, remembering not the accusations of tonight, but the actions that earned them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, decisions about publicity, about legal action, about how to move forward from trauma stacked upon trauma. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Vivian allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in years. Pride, not arrogance or superiority, but simple recognition that she had served honorably, had saved lives, had earned the right to wear these medals regardless of what anyone else believed. She was a combat veteran. She was a hero, even if that word felt uncomfortable. She was damaged, but not broken. And she was not alone. The general had proven that tonight, appearing like cavalry over the hill to rescue one of her own. That bond, that commitment to fellow soldiers, was as real as the medals on the table. Vivian stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city where countless other veterans were living their own struggles with readjustment and trauma and memories that would not fade. She hoped her story, once Raymond told it properly, might help some of them feel less alone, might remind them that their service mattered even when civilians did not understand it, might encourage them to wear their medals with pride despite the anxiety it caused. She was still standing there when Major Reeves quietly knocked and entered, bringing tea and sitting nearby in case conversation was wanted. Vivian accepted both the tea and the silent companionship, two soldiers keeping watch together as the night deepened around them. Safe, vindicated, ready to face whatever tomorrow brought with the knowledge that truth, eventually, had prevailed. The conversation Vivian had been engaged in trailed off awkwardly as the person she was speaking with noticed the attention being directed their way. The woman excused herself politely but quickly, leaving Vivian standing alone near the refreshment table. The isolation felt sudden and stark, like a spotlight had been turned on her in a darkened room. Marcus Pettigrew approached with purposeful strides, the other veteran he had been speaking to following close behind. Both men wore expressions that made Vivian's stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. She recognized that look from her deployments, the face people wore when they had decided someone was the enemy and were preparing for confrontation. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice loud enough to carry to nearby conversations. His tone was polite on the surface, but carried an edge that put Vivian immediately on guard. I could not help but notice your medals. That is quite an impressive display for someone your age. Thank you, Vivian replied carefully, keeping her voice neutral. She could feel more eyes turning toward them, conversations pausing as people tuned in to whatever was developing. Marcus stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the decorations pinned to her chest. Bronze star with V device, purple heart, silver star, combat medical badge. That is a lot of hardware. What unit did you serve with? Vivian felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came when people asked questions she could not fully answer. I served as a combat medic across multiple deployments. Some of my service record is classified, which limits what I can discuss about specific units and operations. The explanation sounded weak even to her own ears, though it was the truth. Classified operations were real and common, but they also sounded like convenient excuses to people unfamiliar with how military security actually worked. She watched Marcus's expression harden, skepticism replacing his initial curiosity. Classified, he repeated, letting the word hang between them with obvious doubt. How convenient. You know what I do in my civilian life. Y exposa stulen valor. I have caught dozens of frauds wearing medals they did not earn, and they all have stories about why they cannot provide proof. I can provide proof, Vivian said, fighting to keep her voice steady. It just requires going through proper channels because of the classification level of some missions. I have my DD-214, my medical records, documentation of my service. Then show it, Marcus demanded. Right now, pull out your phone and show us pictures of your discharge papers. Show us deployment orders. Show us anything that backs up your claim to those medals. The second man spoke up, emboldened by Marcus's aggression. Yeah, because those are some serious decorations. The Silver Star alone, that is for extraordinary heroism. You are telling us you performed acts of extraordinary heroism, but we just have to take your word for it, because it is all classified. More people had gathered now, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Vivian felt trapped, her military training warring with her anxiety. Part of her knew she should extract herself from the situation, disengage, and remove the target from hostile attention. But another part, the part that had earned those medals, refused to retreat in the face of false accusations. I do not carry copies of my service records to social events, Vivian said, her jaw tight. That would be unusual for any veteran. But I am happy to provide documentation through appropriate channels if there is a legitimate question about my service. Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the growing tension. Appropriate channels. Classified missions. You have an answer for everything, do you not? But none of those answers actually prove anything. You know what I think? I think you bought those medals online and pinned them to your jacket, hoping no one would question you at a veterans event. The accusation landed like a physical blow. Vivian felt her face flush, anger and humiliation mixing with the anxiety that was already making her hands tremble. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to maintain composure even as her internal alarm systems were screaming at her to fight or flee. That is not true, she said quietly but firmly. I earned every decoration I wear. I bled for them. I watched friends die while trying to save them. I will not stand here and let you accuse me of dishonoring their memory. Then prove it, Marcus shot back immediately. Stop hiding behind excuses about classification and prove you actually served. Because from where I'm standing, you look like every other fraud I have exposed. Young, wearing impressive medals, getting defensive when asked for proof, claiming everything is classified or unavailable. It is a pattern, and you fit it perfectly. The crowd was growing larger, drawn by raised voices and brewing conflict. Vivian saw a mix of expressions on the faces surrounding her. Some looked skeptical, already convinced by Marcus's accusations. Others appeared uncertain, uncomfortable with the confrontation, but unwilling to intervene. A few showed sympathy, but their support remained silent in the face of the growing mob mentality. Bethany Carlyle, the event organizer, pushed through the crowd with a forced smile that did not reach her worried eyes. What is going on here? This is supposed to be a celebration and fundraiser, not a confrontation. Marcus turned to her, his posture that of someone delivering important news. This woman is wearing medals that I believe she did not earn. I am asking her to provide proof of her service, and she is refusing, claiming everything is classified. As someone who has dedicated significant time to exposing stolen valor, I'm telling you that every red flag is present here. Bethany looked between Marcus and Vivian, clearly calculating the social and political dynamics of the situation. Vivian could see the organizer weighing options, considering which path would cause the least disruption to her event and her organization's reputation. "Miss Thorne, is it?" Bethany asked, glancing at Vivian's name tag. "Perhaps you could help us resolve this quickly by showing some form of documentation. I am sure you understand that stolen valor is a serious issue in the veteran community, and people are rightly protective of military honors." The implication was clear. Prove yourself or be presumed guilty. The burden of proof had been placed entirely on Vivian's shoulders, while her accuser faced no such requirement. She thought about the documents she had at home, locked in a safe because they contained information that was still classified years after her discharge. She thought about the people she could contact who might verify her service, though many of them were still on active duty in positions that made casual phone calls about old deployments complicated, if not impossible. "I understand the concern about stolen valor," Vivian said, directing her words to Bethany, but speaking loudly enough for the gathered crowd to hear. "I share that concern, which is why I would never dishonor actual veterans by wearing decorations I did not earn. But I did not come here expecting to have to defend my service. I came to support wounded veterans and honor those who served."